Hello and welcome back to the Recaps Gateway. Alright? The story begins with a woman named June, who lives in a wooden house in the middle of a forest. After having a nightmare, she prays that the wood protects her family from the great evil and only then musters the courage to open the front door. June walks slowly along the porch and descends a few steps to inspect the grass. At that moment, the sound of insects begins to morph into a moan and a dreadful apparition appears right next to the stairs. The thing stretches out its arm but cannot touch June or cross the threshold of the house. Returning inside, she climbs the stairs to wake her sons, Samuel and Nolan. She informs them that there are 10 minutes left until breakfast. The only one awake is their dog, Coda. But Samuel soon gets out of bed and alerts his brother that there are only 9 minutes left now. When Nolan gets up, we see that he wears an ankle bracelet filled with bells, like an improvised alarm. As the boys begin their day, we learn that they have always lived under the threat of the great evil, a malevolent entity that can take any form to deceive its victim. June does what she can to protect her children from the dire contact, as a mere touch is enough for irreversible contamination. The house is the only safe place, limiting the lives of the three, and food is very scarce. In the afternoon, they prepare for the hunt, taking all necessary precautions. 3 ropes tied to the base of the house are the trick to keeping the family protected even from the outside. With a handmade whistle hanging around their necks, each of the 3 takes the end of their rope and prays before tying it around their bodies. The last part of the ritual is when the boys repeat the mantra, "Never let go." Then, the 3 start moving away in different directions in search of anything edible. It doesn't take long before the great evil comes to torment June in the form of an older man, but she remains steadfast and shows no weakness. Something she has always taught her sons is that the world was already bad before the great evil, and that was what opened the doors for it. June's mother was one of the first to realize the truth, although no one believed her except her husband. He was the one who built the wooden house where the family could live safely until now. Unable to afford to choose what goes on their plates, the boys are thrilled to find reptiles, and Samuel even eats a small frog still alive. Nolan climbs a tree to a bird's nest but only finds empty shells. After he comes down, his eyes shine when he sees an egg on the ground, still whole. He runs to grab it, but a log holds him back. Nolan has reached the limit of the rope and cannot take another step. Frustrated, he pulls with all his might but gains almost no ground. When his brother approaches silently, Nolan is untying the rope. Samuel is outraged by this action and threatens to use the whistle to alert their mother. Nolan swears he had no intention of letting go and just wanted to loosen the knot to reach the egg. Still angry, Samuel says he should have called their mother, as she knows how to stretch the rope by connecting some extra pieces. He also reminds him that the egg might just be another trick of the great evil. The 2 continue walking through the underbrush, with Samuel a few steps ahead. He says he is the wiser of the 2 for being older, but Nolan retorts that the difference between them is at most 3 minutes. Joking, the 2 are almost in good spirits again when Nolan hears the phrase, "She loves me more." He finds it no laughing matter and immediately asks what his brother meant. Samuel looks back with a confused expression and swears he said nothing. Nolan is a bit uncertain, but his hurt feelings went out, and he steps on his brother's rope. Unfortunately, the tumble is much more severe than expected and the jolt is so strong that the rope comes loose from the boy. Rolling down the hill, Samuel ends up breaking his foot. Regretting it, Nolan begins to blow the whistle frantically. June is skinning dinner when she hears the dreaded sound and takes off running. At the embankment, Samuel even forgets the pain when he realizes the rope was left behind. A hissing sound begins to come from the tangle of twisted trees right in front of him. The boy covers his ears and closes his eyes, doing his best to block the entry of the enemy. Unable to reach his brother, Nolan decides to let go too. His mother is facing the same dilemma as she hits the limit of her own rope. As soon as she lets go, a white-haired woman emerges from the thicket, making faces. June grabs her sons and ties a piece of rope around all 3. The elderly woman squats right behind her, and the boys realize their mother is seeing the great evil. She asks several times if either of them has been touched, and they assure her they haven't. But when Nolan asks what she is seeing, she says nothing. Coda is waiting on the porch when the family returns. As soon as they cross the threshold, June throws the boys to the floor, on top of a relief illustration. With a knife in hand, she demands that they touch the drawing and say a prayer aloud, as it is the only way to verify if they have been contaminated. Finally convinced, June puts away the knife and carries Samuel to the sofa. Nolan begins to explain what happened, but their mother does not want to hear his apologies. She tends to Samuel's fracture as best she can, and then he repeats Nolan's question, wanting to know what she saw in the woods. June says that the old woman is her mother and that the great evil always does these things to unsettled people. Later, she cooks the reptiles the three of them hunted in the afternoon. Since the expedition was cut short by the incident, June's dish is almost empty, and even so, the leftovers barely suffice to be shared between the two. While they eat heartily, she begins to recount another incident that happened long ago. She says that the great evil appeared in the form of a little girl in distress, just a few meters outside the rope's radius. The girl was trapped with one foot and cried, begging someone to help her. Every day, June returned to the same spot, and the little girl was still there, growing weaker and sicker each time. The great evil wanted her to doubt and feel pity for the child, lowering her guard to rescue her. Without explaining what happened to the girl, June recalls the danger the three faced earlier and makes the boys repeat the mantra, "Never let go." The next day, the boys go through another step of purification. One by one, they are locked in the basement, tasked to let their imagination run wild. Nolan spends an hour down there and says he saw the house being swallowed by darkness, along with the family. Only when he concentrated on maternal love did he feel the darkness receding. June asks him to look around and be grateful for everything he has. At night, the brothers draw on pages of old books, as there are no new notebooks. Playing pretend, they imagine they have wings and are free to fly. Before sleeping, Nolan asks if his brother saw anything in the forest when the rope came loose. This has never happened before, and it's a bit strange that neither of them saw anything. With unwavering faith, Samuel says they were just lucky, and that's why the great evil couldn't catch them. Then Nolan touches on an even worse subject, mentioning their father and grandparents. Everyone was touched by the great evil at some point, and June had to sacrifice them to protect her children. Nolan wonders what she would have done the day before if they too had been touched. Samuel doesn't like this kind of conversation and says their mother has never lied to them. Meanwhile, June is on the porch sharpening a knife when she hears a man's voice calling her name. It's the ghost of her husband, following her steps outside and trying to provoke her. He accuses her of having run away from home, lying to the children about how the marriage ended. June doesn't like being called by her own name and says she is a different person now. The husband continues with the taunt, always outside the house, unable to enter. He guarantees that sooner or later she will end up letting go, and then the great evil will turn her against her own children. Sometime later, Nolan is helping his mother with the garden when she notices his curious look. June has a snake tattoo on her back, and the boy asks how she got that if the great evil destroyed all the cities. She explains that it was before, when she was as suspicious as he is and didn't believe her mother's stories. The period she lived in the city was just before the end of the world, and she was lucky to return to this house in time. After that, everyone was affected by the great evil and found themselves forced to turn against each other. Seeing her mother a little more open to conversation, Nolan takes a chance with another question, wondering if it's possible there are other houses like this one. He says he would be happy to know that they are not alone, but their mother categorically denies the possibility. Only the three of them are left in the whole world, and that has to be enough. Time passes, and the family situation worsens significantly when a harsh winter drives the animals away from the forest. The food supply dwindles to almost empty, and their meals become smaller and smaller. One of the few leisure options is the old hand-crank record player, and its use is only allowed once a month, on the night of the new moon. Seeing the boys so happy, June even tries to get in the mood, but she can't shake off the threat of hunger. Later, her bath is interrupted by a scare. She hadn't realized that Nolan had entered the bathroom, and now the boy is standing there, staring. Knowing this is another episode of sleepwalking, she takes her son to bed and puts the bells back on his leg. The next day, she goes hunting alone, combining the 3 ropes to increase her range. Aiming at a crow, she realizes the bird is pecking at something and is filled with horror when she sees the great evil in the form of Nolan. No other animal appears after the crow, and she is forced to fry tree bark to feed the boys. As the longer rope hasn't helped much, the two resume accompanying her in the afternoons, helping to peel the trees. This is what Nolan is doing when his shadow suddenly passes by him. The boy gets scared and looks around, realizing he still has the bell on his foot. Then his rope starts to be pulled, and Nolan is dragged through the woods to a well. Waking up frightened, he sees it was all a dream. However, now he is outside the house and without the rope. Something is moving among the bushes, coming his way. He feels calmer when he sees it's just the dog, and it's then that his mother suddenly grabs him. In the bedroom, Samuel panics when he sees the empty bed and rushes down. Nolan is going through the purification ritual again. This time, their mother forces him to repeat the mantra several times before locking him in the basement, still trembling with fear. The following night, Nolan tells his brother that they need to look for food elsewhere. The two know the forest well enough to escape the great evil and can bring back everything they find for their mother. Samuel asks him to speak more quietly, obviously afraid of their mother. We see that she is indeed listening to the conversation, and just as Nolan says they no longer need the rope, Samuel rejects the plan, remembering that June always knows what is best, but Nolan says he's no longer sure about that. The next day, June rummages through an old trunk and finds her Polaroid camera. She explains to her sons what a photograph is, showing some from the time when life was normal. In the camera, there is only one photo left, and she says she is saving it for a special moment. However, she says she doesn't know if that moment will come, as winter is far from over and the chances of survival are very few. When the boys seem scared enough, she says there is still a way to resist, no matter how terrible it sounds. The last option is the dog, whose meat could feed them for more than a month. One of the photos shows that Coda has been with the family since the boys were very young. While this increases the horror of the decision, it also means he won't last much longer anyway, especially without anything to eat. The idea is devastating for Nolan, and he reacts aggressively, pouring out all his doubts at once and accusing his mother of being the real evil in their lives. June says the great evil's plan is to make her children doubt her, and it seems to be working. So instead of imposing her will as she always does, she decides to consult Samuel, leaving the deciding vote to him. The boy not only agrees with the idea but offers to carry it out, sparing his mother the suffering. Outraged, Nolan storms out of the room screaming that he hates the house and goes to hug Coda. June separates the two firmly and takes the dog to the greenhouse shed, but she also breaks down in tears during the farewell. Believing this to be her only chance to save her children, she regains her composure and prepares the bow. At that moment, Nolan appears with a machete and declares that the great evil only exists in his mother's imagination. Determined to prove it, he breaks her rope and locks the door, preventing her from running back inside the house. June starts pounding on the door, begging the boy to open it. He is convinced that nothing will happen to their mother and hopes she finally sees the truth. His brother soon appears, and the two start fighting, while June tries to break the window. Admitting that she hasn't told the whole truth, she confesses that it was she who brought the great evil to the forest and swears that the danger truly exists. A voice coming from behind her begins to call her a naughty girl. The apparition of her mother is inside the shed, ready to attack. She accuses her daughter of having poisoned her food and celebrates the chance for revenge, warning that she will make her destroy what she loves most. With a shard of glass in hand, June says she will never let that happen. To prevent the great evil from touching her children, she chooses her own sacrifice. Entering the shed, Samuel takes a while to accept reality and tries to wake his mother while reciting the mantra in tears. Shocked by the consequences of his actions, Nolan begins to wrap the rope around himself, unsure of what to believe anymore. In the absence of June, the brothers' helplessness is even greater. While Nolan tries to keep them fed, Samuel falls into depression. He says he saw his brother out there, in the middle of the forest, laughing at his loss. No one explains that it was just a bad dream, but Samuel insists he touched the wood before accepting the soup. The next morning, Nolan sets out alone in search of food. Using the same trick of joining the ropes, he goes much further and discovers new parts of the forest. Just as the rope is nearing its limit, he finds a road he has never seen before. Still harboring hopes that there are more people in the world, Nolan begins shouting for help at the top of his lungs. Not getting a response, he returns home dejectedly and climbs the steps without noticing the person approaching. He is startled to hear a man's voice and is unsure how to act when the man begins to speak and introduces himself as Cole. He was out for a walk when he heard the cries for help and decided to investigate. Noticing the boy's worried demeanor and the general state of the house, he asks if everything is all right. Having never seen the great evil or another adult besides his mother, Nolan does not know how to gauge what is before him. However, he decides to take a risk and asks for help, telling the man that his brother needs food. Cole says he has some in his backpack and even offers to give them a ride, saying his car is not far away. But then Samuel emerges on the porch with the bow, saying he is not a fool and will not fall for this trick. He also accuses the outsider of having taken his mother and destroyed the family. Cole doesn't understand anything and becomes frightened by the aggressive child. He promises to leave immediately, but Samuel doesn't want him to move. Nolan says the man could be a real person and asks his brother to leave him alone. As Cole takes a few steps, Samuel seems to calm down for a moment but suddenly changes his mind and pulls the trigger. "Hit!" the man yells and limps away as fast as he can. Nolan follows him and soon finds him behind a tree, realizing there is not much to be done. A feminine voice frightens him, and he sees the man with a cell phone in hand, but he doesn't recognize the object or the police number. When Cole begins to pull his backpack, he grabs the other strap and tries to stop him, but he isn't strong enough. The boy wins the struggle and takes the bag home, opening a can of food as soon as he arrives. Samuel doesn't want to eat that, still firmly convinced that Cole was an apparition. Despite all his brother's arguments indicating otherwise, he refuses to listen to anything that might tarnish their mother's memory, preferring to remain hungry. However, this decision doesn't last all night, and hunger ultimately speaks louder. While Nolan sleeps on the sofa, he eats a bit of everything and starts rummaging through the rest of the backpack. Inside the wallet, he finds a picture of Cole with a girl who seems to be his daughter. His convictions are no longer so firm now, and guilt begins to torment him. Unable to sleep, he goes to the porch and begins playing with a flashlight until he notices strange movement in the shed. Worried, he goes to check and gets the impression of seeing June standing with her back to the door. But when he enters, he sees nothing but a body covered by a blanket. Samuel is leaving the shed when a little girl appears out of nowhere. Saying her father left her waiting in the car and didn't come back, she begins to describe him with Cole's characteristics. The conversation is making Samuel uncomfortable, and things only get worse when the girl recognizes her father's flashlight and sees a suspicious lump on the floor beneath the blanket. Terrified, she takes off running through the woods, and Samuel follows her, trying to explain. The rope begins to intertwine, as if a large knot is tightening around the boy. Whispering to himself that the girl is real, he finally decides to let go to continue searching for her. Soon after, she runs past him, and he follows her until he faces a thin tree. 3 pairs of legs emerge from behind the tree and begin their climb while Samuel watches in great fear. Searching for the creature among the treetops, he does not see it descending right behind him. Then the being reveals itself, and we see that the little girl has transformed into a horrifying monster. Her serpent tongue slips out to touch his hand, quickly crawling over his body and forcing its way into his mouth, transforming the boy into something different and very evil. Meanwhile, Nolan is waking up and soon realizes his brother is missing. He binds himself with the rope to go look for him and then sees that Samuel's rope seems slack and motionless. He starts pulling until his fear is confirmed, reaching the loose end. Even if the great evil does not exist, Samuel's belief is real, and only something extraordinary could make him let go. Then Nolan hears his brother calling his name and tries to follow the voice, running through the woods. Samuel appears right in front of the house, looking possessed, and cuts Nolan's rope. Immediately after, he is seen many meters away. Faced with his first proof that the great evil exists, Nolan rushes home at that moment. Hearing footsteps upstairs, he slowly climbs the stairs and, upon reaching the bedroom, finds his brother sitting on the bed. A kind of dark smoke is emanating from him, but Nolan cannot see it. He approaches his paralyzed brother and touches him. When he tries to recite the mantra, Samuel becomes enraged and pulls out the hidden knife under the blankets to attack him. Nolan runs, and his brother locks himself in the bedroom, putting a record on while setting the curtains on fire. Minutes later, flames are already consuming the house when Nolan realizes the danger. Samuel watches his brother trying to escape through the roof and says that the house can no longer protect him. Trying another way, Nolan sees his mother, who starts calling him. She even manages to control the flames to have the boy come to her. The child does not believe that his mother is standing before him, and knowing it is evil trying to dominate him, he runs away. Outside, Samuel is playing with the Polaroid and decides to capture the moment. The house is already collapsing, and Nolan cannot get out. Opening the trapdoor, he pretends to have entered the basement until the apparition approaches. Then he grabs it and shuts himself down there with the apparition, which begins to struggle until it takes its true form, a horrifying humanoid being with a snake tongue and no eyes. Nolan does what June taught him and focuses on maternal love until the creature surrenders to his embrace before dissolving. The next thing Nolan sees is a helicopter coming to rescue the two brothers. Fallen on the ground near the ruined house, the last photo from the camera reveals a hand on Samuel's shoulder. In the helicopter, Nolan shows him the beautiful city below and says they are finally free. Samuel simply replies, "She loves me more."